Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see all your faces. For those of you who don't know me, um, my name is Soten. I'm a senior student at the Zendo. And for all of those who do know me, well, you're here. So am I. It's really nice to be with you. So while I'm talking, if you are facing a window, feel free to just look out your window at the sky. At some point, I will ask you to specifically do that, but throughout the talk, don't hesitate. Sunset is in 10 minutes, and how the sky changes and how the light changes is part of what I'd like to experience with you today. For the last several months, pretty much since COVID started, my Dharma talks have often focused on what has become one of my preoccupations of late, which is sensory perception and how we experience things when we're in zazen. You know, whether following your breath or working on a koan or doing shikantaza, to what extent are you truly open to what your senses are allowing in, or are you already making selections? I've surprised when I've looked at this carefully how much I actually make selection of things in ways that I thought I was being very open. And it turned out on closer examination, I wasn't. One of those things that I've been thinking about the perception of lately has been the perception of time. Because we do perceive time. We experience time in our bodies. Many of us, I'm sure, wake up 5 minutes before your alarm clock goes off. Many of us know, oh, it must be approaching lunchtime because I feel like I'm ready for lunch. It must be mid-afternoon. I either get a coffee or I take a nap. You get sleepy at night. You wake up in the middle of the night and you know it's the middle of the night. You go on a trip and are jet lagged and you know what time it is back home without having to calculate it. It's time to go to bed, but I'm having lunch with somebody. So we all have experiences of time all the time. And since COVID, I've been paying attention to how time has become a big topic of conversation and has become very elastic. Many of us talk about having too much time alone. Many of us talk about not having enough time by ourselves. When the lockdown hit, lots of people talking about how the day passed in a different way than it usually does. And on the upside, I've been having lots of conversations with people about how with this changed experience of time, we're finding new ways to occupy our time. I see it in the online circulation of people taking photographs, often interestingly at sunset or sunrise. People listening to music more than they have before, or spending time reading poetry, or spending time with Sangha, with more Sangha than they usually spend time with. So COVID has changed our sense of time as well, how slow time was, how long the day was in lockdown for those of us who were at home, but how quickly the day flew by for people working in emergency rooms or in intensive care units. And those times were the same time. So time has been on my mind. I think it's been on all our minds. Additionally, this time of year, very specifically, time comes up for me because of something that I sort of opened up to about 8 or 9 years ago when I actually spoke a little bit on this topic in a Dharma talk, because it's the time of year when the high holidays in Jewish practice show up, and in particular Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, or as Roshi likes to say, the Day of At-One-ment. there's something interesting that the rabbis in the Talmud say about that day. They say that even if you don't fast, even if you don't repent, the day makes atonement for you. And trying to understand that over the years, particularly in years when I've stopped becoming an active participant in a congregation and I'm not spending the day as I used to, the night before and the full day after in synagogue with people, just being on my own by myself, how is it possible to experience that? And I turned, which was unusual for me at that time, I turned to Dogen, specifically to Uji, being time. And so every year this time comes along, I find myself back with Dogen. And then shortly after it this year, I find that that's going to be our study text for the Winter Ango. So I asked Roshi permission to get a jump start on that and bring up Uji. And in particular, try to share with you how it's become meaningful to me beyond the ways in which Dogen is frequently opaque to me. And so I want to start our Ango text a little early and dive in. This is Kaz Tanahashi's translation from Moon and a Dewdrop. And you can find the whole text of Uji on the Village Zendo website. It's there for downloading. I'm making a few slight changes, which will probably be obvious to save me from having to explain things too much. But those will be slight. Some things I will explain. And one of the things with Dogen is your sky becoming multicolored the way mine is. One of the things about Dogen is some of what's difficult is simply because there's terminology and there's references that we don't know what they mean. And so some of those I'll explain to you. In particular, the first few lines are really obscure until you get a few definitions. So 1, an ancient Buddha said, "For the time being, stand on top of the highest peak. For the time being, proceed along the bottom of the deepest ocean. For the time being, 3 heads and 8 arms. For the time being, an 8 or 16-foot body. For the time being, a staff or whisk. For the time being, a pillar or lantern. For the time being, the sons of Zhang and Li. For the time being, the earth and sky." And then for me, I'd probably add in a verse, "For the time being, the myriad galactic webs of the large-scale structure of the universe. For the time being, quarks with fractions of spin." Dogen goes on, "For the time being here means time itself is being, and all being is time. A golden 16-foot body is time. Because it is time, there is the radiant illumination of time." Let me back up some of these references. The highest peak, the bottom of the deepest ocean, earth and sky. So these contrasts. 3 heads and 8 arms is a description that's understood from its own era as being a description of a wrathful deity, which you can think of as our everyday mind. Anger, greed, ignorance, or trying the opposite of those and, you know, walking down the block, gnashing your teeth. Being an 8 or 16-foot body is the Buddha. He is said to have been 8 feet tall, 8 feet tall when sitting down and 16 feet tall when standing up. A staff or a whisk are signs of a Zen teacher or an abbot, a roshi. A pillar or lantern can be thought of as signs of a monastery, representing the monastic community. And the sons of Zhang and Li, that's sort of like Joe Schmo, the average ordinary person walking down the street. All in contrast, all of them are the time being. So he says, for the time being here means time itself is being, and all being is time. A golden 16-foot body is time. Because it is time, there is the radiant illumination of time. Study it as the 24 hours of the present day. 3 heads and 8 arms is time. Because it is time, it is not separate from the 24 hours of the present. So being and time. We're fortunate in English, I feel like, because we have the phrase time being, which I went into Google Translate into a whole bunch of languages, and no one else in other languages that I could find seemed to have that expression where, I mean, what does time being mean for the time being? And here we have it repeated. It's not precisely what Dogen intended, but it sort of smacks of it. And I think that's useful for us that we've got English. So how I've worked with this and how it helped, what helped me become a little bit less fuzzy about what Dogen was trying to point at. I want to take us through one of my little guided meditation kind of things, similar to ones I do before, but with a very different frame of reference. How do we measure time? Usually we measure it using clocks, because clocks are mechanisms that allow us to show the difference between one time and another time, one moment and another moment, because something has changed. It's change in which we notice time. But you don't necessarily need a clock. As I said, our bodies are susceptible to all sorts of experiences that tell us that something has changed, therefore time has passed. So I'd like to explore this a little bit more intimately. So if you can resume a zazen posture. Hands where you customarily have them, whatever mudra you like. Lower your gaze from the sky or from the screen. And return your attention to your breath. And notice how your diaphragm is a clock. You feel your heart beating. It is also a clock. If your bedtime is approaching, melatonin is being released by your pineal gland over the next few hours. Your circadian rhythm. A clock. Let your mind rest in the time that your body marks, moment by moment. Now bring your awareness down to the level of the cells of your body, the cells in your bloodstream, the cells of your skin, the cells of your organs. Some divide often, some divide less often. They are clocks. Some divide once a day. Some divide once a year. Fast clocks. Slow clocks. Time. Trillions of clocks. Now bring your awareness down to the atoms that comprise the molecules that make up your cells. Electrons, protons, neutrons. The electrons in their orbitals, clouds, spinning and pulsing around the nucleus. Some close in, some close out. Clocks. And in quantum physics, particle physicists describe how every electron and every neutron and every proton has a spin. Clockwise or counterclockwise. Every particle. Clocks. Marking time. Hold this experience while I read another bit of Dogen. The way the self arrays itself is the form of the entire world. See each thing in this entire world as a moment of time. Things do not hinder one another, just as moments do not hinder one another. The way-seeking mind arises in this moment. A way-seeking moment arises in this mind. It is the same with practice and with attaining the way. Thus, the self, setting itself out in array, sees itself. This is the understanding that the self is time. Each of those spinning atoms, each of those spinning particles is not yours. There's no particle of your body that did not come from the planet. There's no particle in the body that you did not eat or breathe or drink from the planet. There is no separation. Every atom and every particle of the vast earth, which includes each of us, is marking time. together. Now, holding this awareness, raise your gaze to the window and see how the light has changed as the day changes, as the earth slowly, steadily turns, bringing us away from the sun towards the dark. A clock. Watch that turning as I read a little bit more of Dogen. Do not think that time merely flies away. Do not see flying away as the only function of time. If time merely flies away, you would be separated from time. In essence, all things in the entire world are linked with one another as moments, because all moments are the time being. They are your time being. The time being has the quality of flowing. So-called today flows into tomorrow. Today flows into yesterday. Yesterday flows into today. And today flows into today. Tomorrow flows into tomorrow. Because flowing is a quality of time, moments of past and present do not overlap or line up side by side. Bernie is time. Enkyo is time. Joshin is time. Ryotan is time. Because self and other are already time. Practice enlightenment is time. Being splattered with mud and getting wet with water is also time. In this way, a virus is time. In this way, wearing a mask is time. Having a fever is time. Feeling at ease is time. In this way, does the day atone for us. In this way, we are at one with the 10,000 things. In this way, we are at one with each other and every other sentient being. In this way, we are already Buddha, transcending all karmic bonds.